Hey Panthers, and happy Monday. This week in English, we are going to be talking about plot. So I hope that you are following along with your remote learning book, and let's start right in with this lesson, lesson number 6 on describing plot. So this says, in a story or play, the plot is the series of episodes or events that make up a story. These episodes are moments in the story that are driven by a conflict or struggle that the main character tries to overcome. Like a trail of footprints, the episodes in a plot lead to the resolution or the end of the conflict. So if we're looking at this graphic below, we can see these 3 pictures. And in our first picture, we see that there was a storm at sea and it caused the boat to crash. And you can see some rocks and it looks like a little island. And then in the second story, we can see that the survivors are faced with trying to figure out on how to get home and get off the island. And then in our third one, we can see that they finally wrote a message to signal for help. And that was kind of their last chance. So we often see plot shown as kind of like a roller coaster in which we see the exposition and then the rising action, with the peak being the climax, and then we start to fall with the falling action and our resolution kind of concluding that roller coaster. So let's go ahead and I'm going to break down each one of these parts of a plot. So the exposition is where the introduction of the characters and the setting is. It kind of sets the stage of what's going to happen with the remaining story. In this case, the exposition was a storm at the sea that caused a boat to crash on the rocks of a tiny island. The rising action is going to be where the conflict is introduced, and then kind of the problems start to increase, and then once we understand what the problem is, so in this case the search planes missed the island. We didn't quite see all of this. Maybe up here you can see some planes. They missed the island despite the survivors' efforts to signal for help. So right here is they're trying to signal a plane. And then once you get to a rising action, we're going to kind of slide directly into that climax, which is going to be our turning point in the story, where things kind of start to really get real. As we talked about plot in class, we know that the rising action can last a very, very, very long time. The majority of a passage in most cases, or the majority of a book. It's not until you get to that turning point towards the end in the movie or in your book when things really start to the problem is at its all-time high, and then finally once things start to calm down towards the end and we get to a resolution, that's that climax. So numbers 1, 2, and 3 take up the majority of the story. And then once we finally hit that climax, in this case it was that the supplies were running out, and then they send a message in a bottle as their last resort. So then we see our falling action. And the falling action is kind of the events that lead to solving the problem or the conflict. We didn't get to see the falling action in our comic. It would have been we would have needed another picture. It says a fisherman from a nearby island found the bottle. And then finally, our last part is our resolution. And the resolution is going to be your final outcome, whether good or bad. It tells what happens to the characters after the conflict is solved. So the fisherman rescues the survivors. That's our resolution. It says, in most stories and plays, one event leads to another, unfolding in a way that increases tension and builds up to a turning point called the climax, the moment of greatest suspense, surprise, or excitement. Think of the plot as a roller coaster ride. The events move you up until you reach the very top and then send you zooming down to the story's end. So let's move on to our modeled instruction here. Read the first 2 paragraphs of a short story. This story is called Alma's First Cattle Drive. Blinding lightning flashed across the sky, followed by deafening thunder and driving rain. Alma had grown up listening to her father's astounding stories of cattle drives. She had always wanted to join in, but her father told her she wasn't ready. Now, he was finally giving her the chance to prove to him that she would be more help than trouble on the trail. This was her first cattle drive, and the weather was Alma's first challenge. When they reached the river, Alma instantly noticed that the water was dangerously high. When the cattle began to cross at a shallow spot, Alma was the only one to notice a calf getting swept up in the current. Alma charged into the water and stopped her horse downstream from the calf to keep it from losing its footing. So it says, explore the answer to this question. How does the story's plot build to a climax? So read the following plot diagram, and then we're going to fill in the rising action and also the climax. So I think that the first paragraph really is kind of the exposition, and it describes our setting, which is a trail in a terrible storm. Oops. Oh no, I'm just trying to get, okay. Which is a trail in a terrible storm. It introduces some characters, Alma and her father. It says that she wants to prove to her father that she can help on the cattle drive, but bad weather makes it challenging. So we can see that the exposition right here, Alma goes on her first cattle drive, but a terrible storm has made it dangerous. And then the conflict or the problem was that she struggles to prove herself to her father and keep the animals on the cattle drive safe. So we're going to figure as the story continues, as we continue to read, we notice that the cattle start crossing the river. We're trying to figure out where that rising action is. Remember that suspense building. That's what we're looking for. So what part of our story did really had the suspense starting to build? I think was when a calf starts to get swept up in the current. I think right there was like, oh, there's your rising action. So we're going to put that here. A calf starts to get swept up in the current. And then this all kind of comes to our climax or our turning point where Alma kind of charges into the water and with her horse, and they stop the calf from losing its footing. So Alma protects the calf by stopping her horse downstream. So if you really kind of look into it, we have like an entire paragraph on exposition, rising action, and then just quickly this one little sentence here is your climax. Moving on to the guided instruction, we're going to continue reading, where it says, Alma stayed there in the stinging rain, her horse breathing hard beneath her. She was cold and hungry, but she kept her horse on the edge of the shallow river bank until each animal had safely passed. When she finally rode ashore, her father waved to get Alma's attention. He paused for just a moment to tip his hat to her before they continued. Alma knew then that she had proven herself to be a valuable member of the team. So let's look at this close reading right here. On page 54, Alma's quest to prove herself is challenged when the weather creates a dangerous situation for the cattle. Find and underline the sentence here that shows the end result of Alma's efforts. So the end result of her efforts of saving all of those, the calf at first, but then she stayed there while she made sure every animal safely passed. So her end result was that she proved that she was a valuable member of the team. And let's move on to our multiple choice question. Which sentence, we kind of just answered this question. Which sentence best shows the resolution of the story? Remember, the resolution is the conclusion or the final outcome of the story. Is it A, she was cold and hungry, but she kept her horse on the edge of the shallow riverbank until each animal had safely passed? B, Alma stayed there in the stinging rain, her horse breathing hard beneath her? C, when she finally rode ashore, her father waved to get Alma's attention? Or is it D, Alma knew then that she had proven herself to be a valuable member of the team? So we kind of have already underlined this answer. That answer is D. That's kind of the final outcome of the entire story. So the final part of the story includes a resolution. Remember that the main character's problems are usually solved at this point. So some people might get caught up in that the resolution is that each animal had gotten across the river and that was the end of her problem. But her problem in the beginning of the story in our exposition, the problem was not that the horses couldn't safely pass. The problem was that she needed to prove herself to her father. So our resolution, the answer to that problem, wasn't that all the cattle had made it safely across the river. The resolution or the final outcome of that problem was that she had proven herself to be a valuable member of that team. And so that's kind of what we're going to explain right here. It says, explain how you could tell which choice was the resolution of the story. So we need to explain how you could tell. I could tell the resolution of the story by going back to my exposition and determining the conflict or problem. Which was Alma's quest to prove herself. Alma proves herself and her father tips his hat, and she proves to be a valuable member of the team. So the main part in this part for Show Your Thinking is making sure that you talk about going back to that original exposition problem and not just talking about a different problem. And then here is our final part, our guided practice. Read the drama, and that drama is a play. And using the study buddy and the close reader to guide our reading. So let's look at our study buddy first. He says, to help me understand the plot of this drama, I'm going to identify its episodes. So we're looking for our 5 episodes: the exposition, the conflict, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. So let's read Lost in Time by Marcus Factor. The curtain rises on an elaborate museum exhibit featuring a gigantic T-Rex skeleton. 2 boys gaze up at it with awe. Jamal, look at the enormous size of that thing's teeth. James, that thing is the tyrant king of the dinosaur world, the ferocious and infamous Tyrannosaurus Rex. Cool! Mr. Flynn will have a field day with this guy. As they glance around, the boys discover that they're alone. James, we've lost our class. They must have kept going. Well, we'll just have to find the mummies, right? Yeah, but we have a ton of territory to cover. The boys began walking. As they pass the T-Rex, a tremendous roar booms out and they jump back terrified. Jamal says, "Is it just me, or did that skeleton make noise?" James, breathing heavily, "Yes, sound effects, I suppose. We have to find our class. We're 4 hours from home." Jamal says, "Feels like we're in the jungle a billion years ago." A vast variety of dinosaur sounds resonate as the boys continue trekking through the museum. Suddenly, a distressed teacher hurriedly runs onto the stage. Mr. Flynn. "James! Jamal, I've been searching everywhere! What were you—" Extremely distracted. "This is a remarkable new exhibit! We have just enough time to get to the class and take in the dinosaur display before lunch." So looking over here at our close reading, it says, how is James and Jamal's problem solved? Circle the episode at the end of the play that resolves their conflict. So how did James and Jamal solve their problem? Or when did their problem get solved? Their problem was that they couldn't find their class, right? So their problem got solved when Mr. Flynn comes around, right? And he's like, "Hey, y'all, we've been looking for you forever." And then they realize, on top of solving the problem, that they're not even going to be in trouble. And then we're going to underline the sentences that illustrate the play's rising action, the climax, and the falling action. And then we're going to talk about how these events work together to get to this part, our resolution. So our rising action, remember, our rising action is when our problem is introduced. So right here, and it wasn't even words, it was just reminder, in a play when we see things that are in parentheses, those are stage directions. So those are kind of, nobody's saying them, but they're doing them. And in this case, they glance around and they discover that they're alone. That right there is the rising action. That's the introduction of their problem. That's when they realize that they've lost their class. So the next thing that we're going to look for is our climax. And again, our climax is the big turning point of our story, which kind of occurs right here, where they get scared. This is where they're like, okay, not only can we not find our class, but now I'm afraid. And that's when that T-Rex roars. And then our falling resolution, so that was our climax, them being absolutely terrified. And our falling resolution is right here. Suddenly, a distressed teacher hurriedly runs onto the stage. So that's like the final part right before the resolution. That's your event that leads to the solving of your problem. So our problem got solved because Mr. Flynn found them. And the falling action is going to be what happened right before that, and that's going to be that teacher came into the room. So that's where our falling action is. So now that we've kind of done a lot of this hard work here, let's look at our next page and answer some questions. Number 1, what is the conflict in the play? Is it A dinosaur exhibit distracts people too much? B, the boys have gotten separated from their class? C, the boys didn't know their way around the museum? Or D, the teacher is angry at the boys for not paying attention? Reminder, it's always a good idea to eliminate answers for the sake of time, I just kind of grab them and put the correct answer on, but you should maybe pause the video, try to at least knock out 2 wrong answers, and then go back in your text and find the right one. So our conflict here, and if I look at my hint, which choice illustrates the main problem that drives the rest of the story's events? So remember, our problem got solved when Mr. Flynn found them. So that should really help us figure it out that our conflict is B. The boys have gotten separated from their class. And number 2, which episode, remember they're calling episodes, that's what they're calling the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. The parts of the plot, they're calling those episodes. So which episode from the plot serves as the resolution? Is it James and Jamal get distracted by the T-Rex and end up lost? Is that the resolution? B, James and Jamal make a plan to search for the class. C, James and Jamal hear noises coming from the dinosaur display. Or D, James and Jamal are found by Mr. Flynn and go get their class. If you need the hint over here, it says which choice shows how the play's problem is solved without focusing on the events that are leading up to it. So that correct answer is D, that they are found by Mr. Flynn. And number 3, our final question says, explain another way that the author could have resolved the conflict of this play. Describe whether or not it would be a good resolution based on the play's plot events. Use at least 2 specific examples to support your answer. So I could write that. This obviously is up for your discretion, so whatever you guys kind of come up with. And if I want to see a hint, it says, what is the conflict in the plot? What would an alternate resolution solve the problem? Why or why not? So I know that my conflict was that they were lost from their class. And in this case, in the actual story, they were found by their teacher. So it says, would an alternate resolution solve the problem? Well, yeah, I think that they could have found their class without their teacher running and finding them, and that would have solved their problem as well. So I'm going to come up with an alternate resolution to our story, or ending to our story, that includes the boys finding their class. So I'm going to say, the boys could find their class by pretending they are tour guides in the jungle. This would solve their problem because they would find their class and no longer be lost. And then going back into my text, I can see that they said, Jamal says, feels like we're in the jungle a billion years ago. So this sentence, number 12, is a really good it's a really good specific example to support my response. So in line 12, Jamal says that it seems like they are in the jungle a billion years ago. And the dinosaur noises also give that effect. The boys' imaginations could help lead them to their class before Mr. Flynn finds them. So obviously, this one's going to be up for your discretion. Whatever you think that would be a great resolution based on the play's previous plot. And then this right here, is your Common Core practice. This is the independent practice from Black Beauty, written by Anna Sewell. You are to read this excerpt of Black Beauty and answer the 4 questions. You may submit this multiple ways. You can do this just right on your remote learning book, snap a picture of it and email it to me, or snap a picture of it and Snapchat it to me. You can also just send me an email with the letters for the number, or I will have this document uploaded onto the Google Classroom and you can use the interactive features and submit it on Google Classroom. Have a great week, Panthers!